Now we go to Johanne Bouchard, sorry for the pronunciation, from the Observatory for Cultural Rights and Diversity. Thanks.
Bonjour, good morning, buongiorno. Just testing if the microphone is good for everyone.
Okay.
Prima di tutto vorrei ringraziare.
First of all, I would like to thank the City of Rome and the organizers of this conference for the opportunity that this conference affords. It is a great pleasure for me to be with you today.
Join my congratulations for the work that have been put into the charter, into the drafting of the Rome Charter, and for giving it such a person and human dignity-centered approach. It's always in times of crisis or emergencies or when human rights are violated that what is essential or fundamental really comes to light. And accordingly, the pandemic is not any kind of different, just as Patrice mentioned it before, but it only made worse or more visible the social inequalities and the dysfunctional relationships that we have with nature and with others and with time that were already latent and already there. So during the last June and September sessions of the Human Rights Council, but also in the coming session to the General Assembly, there's a number of special procedures of special rapporteurs that have exactly done this, is to look into how the pandemic and the measures that have been taken to counter it have had an impact on our possibilities of living in dignity and exercises on human rights. And there's a whole palette of how these inequalities have come to the fore. So indeed, if the pandemic does not discriminate, as it actually is contagious in its nature for everyone, and measures that have been applied for all and should be protecting all, just like washing your hands, they should be protecting everyone. And at the same time, it still resulted in a wide discrepancies, hitting a lot harder on persons who were already in poorer health conditions, who were less integrated in social protection networks, on workers who were economically more fragile or employed into sectors that were less valued. So generally, the crisis had more impact across the globe on any part of our society that was already marginalized, already discriminated against. So if the Rome Charter was developed during this time of crisis, the underlying situation is the same thing here that it aims to address, meaning the need for the right to participate fully and freely in cultural life, to be conceived and understood as a vital to local sustainable development and treated as such. This situation existed before. Now, as Farida Shahid mentioned yesterday, the pause button that the current pandemic is giving us at a great human cost is an opportunity that we need to seize to rethink the place that is giving to participation in cultural life generally in our local policies and in our development models. So what the charter, the Rome Charter says is that, first of all, this is a right, and this has been discussed yesterday. It should be exercised fully and freely by all persons, so every inhabitant, through their beliefs, knowledge, values, and creative activities. So it was key before, it came to the fore during the crisis, but it remains completely relevant for afterwards. So how do we seize this opportunity? So Yvonne Danders yesterday stressed the universal nature of the right in international human rights law and the fact that it implies obligations for the states and accordingly for all the levels of governances to respect, to protect, and to implement the right without discrimination. What the Charter makes explicit is exactly that local governments are going to take a responsibility at their level to implement this right. And the relevant question that we have is here in this session is really, how do we achieve equality in the exercise of the right, especially when acknowledging the vast diversity that makes our cities and that makes our communities? So how do we combine the two of those? So I think to answer just in the same lines as Edgar just did before, and thank you for the very nice context that you gave, Edgar. I think the first thing to do is really to define what kind of equality are we talking about. Equality in itself in the air like that is not giving us a lot of things to work with. So what is the equality that we really seek to achieve, and what are the inequalities that we want to avoid? If we really truly believe that our cultural diversity is a richness and a wealth and the heritage of humanity, then what we want is not for everyone to be the same. So a human rights approach helps us define exactly what kind of equality we're looking for. So what we're striving for is an equality in dignity for each person. It's equal rights recognized for all and equal protection from the law, but also, and as much as possible, equal opportunities to exercise the rights. And this is where I think the charter can tip in. So if you take cultural rights, which is a little bit more what I've been working on, you can make these four elements even more precise, because cultural rights and culture goes at the heart of what makes us, what makes our identities and our specificities, what we care for and what we cherish. So if we talk about equal dignity of each person, it means each person's human dignity is expressed through the cultural references, values, beliefs that we carry. So to achieve equal dignity, we need to acknowledge and respect these as resources for the person's dignity and not suppress them or make them invisible, as has been raised right now. It gives us a sense of self, but it is also the means through which we understand and interact with others and with the world. Recognizing equal rights for everyone and protection of the law on an equal basis implies steering clear of all the forms of cultural relativism that still exist, and the thoughts and the processes that justify granting lesser or other rights to certain people, to certain groups, on the basis of who they are or are not, of what they value, what their beliefs are, and the way that they live. It implies just being aware of the stereotypes, of the hierarchies that are there, and asking yourself and being considerate of what is considered the norm and what is considered outside of the norm, and minority, and therefore maybe less valued and less visible. Finally, to achieve equal opportunities for the exercise of human rights implies looking closely into the diverse environments and the specific context that people live in. So if you qualify the context and look into the lived realities of people, this is where you can find the most favorable conditions for the exercise of their rights. And this is where it becomes apparent what is needed and what needs to be worked on. It's only with a good knowledge of the context that we can evaluate the if the opportunities are truly equal, and see what needs to be improved or adjusted, maintained or developed in another way. So in other words, to reach substantive equality, it implies giving much more attention than has been given so far to diversity and to cultural rights. It sounds like a paradox, but it's really through real acknowledgement of the fact that there's a diversity of person, and inside of they also have diversity of values that they carry, and resources that they refer to. They live in specific environments and contexts. Acknowledging this diversity and this complexity, but also the fact that nature is a dynamic process and evolving in its nature. This gives us the possibility of really looking into what is equal dignity, equal rights, and equal opportunities, and how we can better achieve it. So if we go back to the question of this session with this in mind, so how can we address the real inequalities that have profoundly influenced the participation of people in cultural life? A few years ago, the group of Fribourg that I had a chance to work with when working on cultural rights proposed to consider cultural life with this definition as the space where all interactions occur, where we express and exchange values, and what has meaning for us. So this includes a whole spectrum of spaces that go between the most private settings of our homes or our correspondence, the way we celebrate, the way we show affections, or the way we mourn, which has been relevant in this time of lockdown for a lot of us. But it also goes all the way to the most public settings where we express our convictions and our values and ideas for all people to see, to comment, and to react to, just like an article that we would publish, or the streets where we interact also a lot. So participation in cultural life happens in this variety of setting, and in all of these settings, there are places throughout the day where inequalities can occur. So I'm echoing a lot of what has been said before, but and especially by Patrice has raised it very well in the introduction, which is that we're completely beyond the mere sphere of cultural policies here. We're talking about all the policies where, if it's all the places we interact, we're talking about all the spheres where life is taking place and where we are creating society. So it's really not one sector only, but a much broader reflection here that needs to be had. As is often the case when I present, I don't have a lot of responses, but I think what we can have is a set of questions that helps us move. And the Roma Charter lists 5 capabilities that local public authorities, together with all the relevant actors, can commit to support inhabitants to fulfill. So it's their capacity to discover, to enjoy, to share, to create, and to protect cultural resources. These build really a cycle for the full realization of the right to participate fully and freely in cultural life. So each of these capabilities offers an entry point through which I think we can question inequalities, look for them, and see how to address them in the conditions of the exercise of the right. So if I take the capability to discover, it raises question about, if I want to discover what cultural resources there are, it poses the question of, are they even available? So what are the resources that are available in the territory and inside of the proximity? What are the resources that are there? Which resources are valued or have been invested? Which ones are presented and which ones are absent? Does this represent the diversity of who we are? Or is it only showing one side of our society? Farida mentioned yesterday, and I think it's really relevant, that when talking about the narratives that memorials will put into public spaces, the fact that this may implicitly tell the story of certain and exclude the story of others. So how can we change that? Availability of the resources should also not be limited to a territory. So we need to also ask ourselves, if we talk about discovering, what are the opportunities that exist to discover the resources that exist somewhere else, and to be open and exposed to some of the resources that others may have, meaning also accessing the heritage, the knowledge, and the creativity of others, which is also a right that is in the covenant. More important, the capability to discover will raise the question of equal access to cultural resources, access to physical spaces. If I'm thinking about the senses that I use, so can I enter an institution, see or touch the resources? Can I hear the speeches or the music that is there? There's also the question of intellectual access. Is the knowledge or the resource accessible in a language or level of language that I can actually understand? And how many of those are there? So do we have a multiplicity of entries to help people really discover these resources? The financial aspect, I think Edgar presented it better than I did, but is there a cost in the access of certain, and is it creating an exclusion? So do we have other means of presenting the resources that will take away the financial burden that may represent, or the obstacle? And then, but there's also the symbolic aspect when we were talking about the narrative. Do I feel like I'm entitled to access these resources, to engage with them, to try to understand them, to ask questions about them? The capability to enjoy has a component here of understanding the cultural resources that are there through the right to information and the right to education that have been raised yesterday in the discussion. So beyond an initial admiration that may trigger my curiosity, in order to enjoy a resource and a knowledge, I have to have some basic notions to understand it. So are there teachers, mentors, amateurs, clubs, publications that can provide a variety of opportunities to learn about the cultural resources that are there? In what languages are there? Are there various interpretations that are presented? Do these contribute to developing, and all of these will contribute to developing favorable condition. An important and the capability of sharing here, I'm engaging even more, as I said, in this process of realizing the right to fully take and freely participate in cultural life, if I want to share, it adds a dimension of practicing, of experimenting, of interacting with the resource. It stresses on one hand the capacity to not be a mere spectator, but also on the other side, a reciprocity. So it has to go both ways. It's not only me going towards what might be the norm, but also what are the opportunities of mixities, of bringing things together? What are the spaces that actually make it possible to learn from each other? And is everything into little clusters, or there are really bridges that make it possible for us to understand each other and learn more? So seeking to reach more equality here would mean asking whose resources or values and knowledges and ideas are seen and shared, which one are considered to be common to everyone, and which one are just, oh, but that's their resource, or that's their values, that's not for everyone to share into. Are there places, are there times, are there opportunities to really express, to be exposed to other things and to really learn about them, to really share and have a sense of common understanding? Is everything in separate silos? The capability to create is and others can talk about this one, I think, a lot more as creators, is really, and I loved what was said before, the capacity to imagine further, to go beyond, to break the methods, to add new perspectives, or innovate and bring something into the debate. And finally, the capacity to protect raises the question of how much have I made these resources mine? I've appropriated them, the knowledge, the value, to the extent that I feel both responsible for them, entitled to protect them, and enough entitled and enough appropriated for me to also see to its transmission to others. So of course you can take these at different levels. Like I said, you can take it in the private context as much as you can take it into institutions. But it's also about a citizenship approach into feeling entitled to raise one's voice about the common good, about the definition of what makes our societies, our spaces, what defines us, and what defines our future and the future that we want. So it's the development that we want, and it's the future that we can envision together. To which extent do I share in defining the society and the cultural life that I'm involved in? Do I feel like I belong, or do I feel like I'm just passing by, or I'm just visiting, and it's not for me to take part in it? So I think these questions that we have, and that the 5 capabilities that are in the charter, is just opening basically a spectrum in which we can ask questions on a regular basis to see, are we creating here more equalities? Are we really creating possibilities and equal opportunities for everyone to interact, or are we leaving some people out? So yeah, that's a little bit what I wanted to put on the table for the discussion, and I'm looking forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Johanne.